Today's lecture will be over Chapter 3, Section 2, Objectives. Number 1, explain the factors that influence the climate of a region. And number 2, describe the effects of El Nino, La Nina, and global warming. So we start off by looking at basically factors that are affecting climate. Again, climate is going to be kind of the average temperature over a long period of time. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to say that an area is got to be cold all the time or warm all the time. For example, in Nebraska, we can say that there are 4 distinct seasons: fall, winter, spring, and summer. That would be our climate. So there are different things that affect the climate. Number 1 is going to be wind currents. Wind and ocean currents basically help distribute the sun's heat. Convection is the upward motion of air that transfers heat into the atmosphere. So what we see is that with convection is that it pushes that air up into the atmosphere, and that basically can warm it down and cool it down. The Coriolis effect is a bending of winds due to the Earth's rotation. If you think about it, we think of winds that are just from one point to the next, almost in a straight line. But because the Earth is rounded, it's going to go ahead and it's going to curve those winds, and that's a Coriolis effect. Now there's also ocean currents, and this resembles rivers flowing into the ocean. Warm water flows away from the equator towards the pole. Cold polar water flows backwards towards the equator. So if you look at a drawing here, what we'd see is that this would be the areas near the equator. What happens is that the sun is going to go ahead, and of course we got to draw him with this smiley face. What we see is that the sun's rays are going to come down and they're going to hit this water right here. What happens again, if we go ahead and draw the entire globe right here, what we see is that winds and also the ocean currents will take this water that is getting hit by the equator, and it's going to go ahead and distribute it to the north and to the south. And what we see then is that because of this effect, the equator basically is going to get cooled down, and then you're going to see the northern area near the poles, those are going to get warmed up to the point that we don't have the extreme temperatures, the negative 200 or 300 degrees. We don't have 200 and 300 degrees near the equators. And then what happens is that near the poles this water comes, and again this is going to be colder because of what we talked about in chapter 3 section 1. We talked about the climates, and so what happens is that this area gets a lot cooler. So what we see is that this motion back and forth basically takes the warm water, distributes it to the north and south, and then the north and south waters comes down, cools this down, and basically then what we see is that this equator area is still going to be warm and these poles are still going to be cold, but they're not so extreme that we basically can't live there. And that's of course why our planet is able to have life, is because of this cooling and warming effect. Now there's zones of latitude. There's lower tropical latitude, there's middle latitude, and there's high latitude. Low latitude is hot all year round, middle latitude is warm summers and cold winters, and high latitude is cold all year. So if we go back to the drawing of the Earth right here, you're going to see the equator here. This is going to be a low latitude because if you think of what the actual latitude number of the equator is, it's 0. So anything with a lower number is going to be closer to the equator, and they're of course going to be warmer. If you start getting up into the high latitudes up here and down here near the poles, those are going to have higher numbers, and so what we might see is that we might see an 80 degrees north or south. So those are going to be high latitudes, those are going to be colder. And then of course right in between those are going to be the mid latitudes. So make sure that you learn that language there, because we're going to see that, we're going to read that a lot when we start talking about zones of latitude. Now we've also got other factors that affect climate. The first again is going to be where they fall basically on the Earth: north, south, and high latitudes, mid latitudes, low latitudes. We also see elevation. Elevation is the distance above sea level. As elevation increases, climate gets colder. Also topography, this is going to be landforms and their distribution in an area. Landforms, especially mountains, affect the climate. Again, the higher up you go, the colder it's going to be. We're also going to see changes in the climate. An El Nino is water that push warm Pacific Ocean water towards the Americas. What this does is this really throws off your climate. For example, if we're in an El Nino, we're probably going to have a very A very warm fall, really a warm spring as well, and we just see it being a lot warmer. It's going to be a lot hotter during the summertime. La Nina is when winds push warm waters towards Australia and Asia. Doesn't affect us as much as El Nino because, of course, we're in the northern hemisphere. But what we see is that this El Nino and La Nina are going to cause natural and worldwide changes in climate. Again, it could be warmer, it could be colder. One of the effects of El Nino sometimes that we've seen is that when an El Nino is done, it actually is going to cause the climate to get colder. So El Nino and La Nina, really we hear more the El Nino because that's what affects us. Now the last change in climate is going to be the global warming. The global warming is a gradual warming of the Earth's atmosphere, and what we see is a greenhouse effect in which the Earth warms due to trapped solar energy. So if we look at our drawing right here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to have the Earth right here, and then we go ahead and we have the Sun. Now, of course, as we've talked about this before, the Sun's rays are going to go ahead and it's going to come and it's basically going to warm up our planet. Now, there is an area right around here, you probably heard about the ozone, the atmosphere, things like that, that sometimes it's going to go ahead and it's going to force those bad rays to basically go back into space. Sometimes we go ahead and we see these rays basically continue to go through there, and then it warms up our planet. And this right here is going to make our planet much more comfortable to live in. Well, what we are seeing is that we're seeing that our ozone and our atmosphere is being affected by different things like too many fossil fuels being burned, too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so what we see is that with that atmosphere breaking down, with the basically getting too much carbon dioxide into this atmosphere, we start seeing temperatures rise. And of course what that means is a greenhouse effect is happening, and that's causing global warming. That concludes our lecture over Chapter 3, Section 2. Please complete your assessments at this time.